All right, today I want to go over the process of taking your models with your textures and then putting them into some lighting setup inside of Cinema. I also want to go into lighting setup inside of Keyshot so you can see both. For your final turn-in, you're turning in a, wherever my sheet is, you're turning in your scene, textures, final movie, and image. And you're doing a camera sweep across the items and a magazine-like ad for your product. It says our product, but it's supposed to say your product. And I obviously meant to put that. There we go. I don't care if you do it in Keyshot, if you do it in Cinema, or if you do it inside of Dimensions like I talked about before. I want you to see these things. The drone, for sure, 100%, the end product will be in a more photorealistic environment, not inside of Cinema, okay? So that's what I want to cover today, just so you can see the process of doing that. I will not be covering everything that's inside here because some of the stuff we've already covered. I've already covered how to do that kind of background, so I don't need to show you how to do that. That's the same kind of background I did on the text animation, right? That seamless backdrop. That's all that is. For the materials in here, once you have your checkerboards on there, those are your placeholders. You then need to obviously bring these things back in so that they place correctly. So each item should have a material. I like to make the base material that's going to go across all of them. Typically, if you have like one plastic, that plastic is going to be the same on all your items if it's the same kind of plastic. If one is a shiny, if one is a transparent, yes, those are different. But if you can find those similarities, it makes your life a lot easier. So I'm just going to say base plastic. Oops. And then I'm not even going to pick a texture right now. I'm just going to grab a color. And for my reflectance, I'm going to go in here and choose Beckman. Each one of these, just so you're aware of it, each one of these is a way that Cinema is calculating how reflections are created. If you ignore my Game of Thrones stuff there for a second. C4D, Beckman, and I always forget the other one, GGX. Oops. I didn't want that, I wanted this. There we go. So these are the different ways that the highlights and the reflections are kind of calculated. So you can see that in this case, GGX is a very fine one. This one is kind of bigger, and that one's tinier. It's not terribly important right now to understand all of these. Just be aware that that setting could change how the reflections are looking. So if you go into a company and they're like, you know, we want this type of material, and you have a hard time getting it, typically you can jump into this menu and play with the kind of specularity here to get different things. Typically anything that says legacy you want to avoid. Those are the old ways, just so you're aware of it. The ways that reflections used to be calculated was not even close to physically accurate. Reflections in the real world typically have a difference, okay? So this here, that's not a reflection. That's a refraction. There we go. So this sphere has a perfect reflection pretty much all the way around it, okay? The left side, the right side, the front. But in the real world, they don't. If you look at a car and you see the reflection in a car bumper. I like it when Google just has the stuff already set up to know what I want. There we go. You'll see the reflections on the side here are a lot stronger than the reflections dead on, right? In the past, what the reflections would do is that it's the same strength all the way around, and you create these very unrealistic surfaces when you have that. So these legacy ones, typically that's what they're going to do. The reflections are strong over the entire thing. There's no drop off. There's no softness to them. These ones up here are typically the ones that you'd want to use. Beckman is just an easy one to use. It's simple, and it covers a lot of surfaces. Roughness, obviously we can play with the roughness of the surface. Something like plastic typically would have a bit of roughness to it, but you really have to analyze the kind of plastic. On here, this isn't rough at all. You can see really crisp reflections inside this bottle. So for this bottle, I would probably pull the cap reflections down. Maybe not all the way off, but definitely not where it was way up top. This also doesn't have any reflection strength. Anytime we talk about reflection, we're dealing with a thing called reflection, and then there's also the specular. So the highlight that happens on this bottle is happening because we have a light source that's reflecting into here, and that's where we're getting that. That's called the specular in 3D. So as I pull that down, you see that the reflections go away. As I pull it up, you can see them. Once we start pulling this up, we're actually going to get reflections of the environment in there. So we're able to control those two things. And the reason for that is sometimes you'll have good reflections on an object, but sometimes that light source reflection is way too strong. And so you need to pull that down by taking that specular and knocking that back down some. You also have this global reflection brightness where you can pull the entire thing down and pull the specular all the way down, or even the entire thing. Just kind of tone it down if you need to, okay? So for this type of plastic, which is kind of like a shampoo bottle, let me go to a shampoo bottle. And I always like to look up the photography of it because you might just get some random image. All right, so something like this, you can see that it definitely has a reflection. That's where that big white streak is coming from. That's the light source. And because it's not crystal sharp, there is some softness to it. So there definitely is a bit of reflection, so maybe like that. And then there's a bit of roughness, so maybe like that. Okay, we'll adjust it further. And then the specular strength, we'll keep it, let's say, there for now. Cool. Another thing to look at is the bump. So on this bottle, let me view the image. This is a pretty high definition image. On this bottle, it's pretty smooth all the way around here. So there's not really a bump that we would need. Sometimes you'll see plastics that have a little bit of grit or a little bit of tooth to them. In that case, you may want to have it. I don't have any on this one either. Oh, your monitor, right? So on your monitor, there's a little bit of bump on the plastic there. So in that case, I would come down to bump. I would go to texture, and I would add in a noise. And if I go to surfaces, sorry, not surfaces, I go right here, this is the different noise pattern that I could take. This is way too big, way too blobby. I would go into this. I would take my global scale down, so let's say 10% or 11%. And then I would go back to the bump node, and then I would take this down to, let's say, 2%. And what that does, it just gives it a bit of texture to it so that it has that on there. I'm going to leave it that way. We can see what it looks like and then tweak it from there. All the stuff that we see inside this window is just stuff that is preview. Once we actually put it onto our scene, if we have a huge item, it's going to look different than if we have a small item. So you have to be aware of that and adjust accordingly. All right? So good enough for now. I'm going to hit OK. Here's all my stuff. I'm just going to delete the materials I have on there right now. There we go. And then I'm going to just get rid of this UFO bottle. I don't like that one. And there's a round bottle. Let's get rid of that as well. All right. So now I'm going to drop this base material onto my object. If you drop it onto a group, so I've grouped all my objects, they're all part of that same thing, it's a lot easier to just assign it and then I can remove it later. So now when I look at this, I can see what it's going to look like. Now I've added lights into the scene, so we're going to see something that's a little bit different than what you would see otherwise. This is with lighting. It's obviously way too much. And this is without lighting. So let's get rid of lights, this, light. There we go. I think it's all the lights in my scene. Oh, there's still a light somewhere. Get rid of that. All right, I think that's all my lights now. Yep. So here it was at the beginning, here it is now. Okay. So the specular on these are way too much, so I need to knock down the reflection on them. I'm just going to knock it down a little bit. So I'm going to go to my reflection. I'm going to pull the reflection down a little bit. I'm going to pull the roughness, let's say, down a little bit more. And then let's see what that looks like. All right, that's looking better. I'm getting a nice little streak down the middle here. That's fine. Once I add my lights, it'll have more control of it. All right, that's good enough for now. Cool. So now I'm going to add some lights into my scene. Typically, I will stick with area lights. I have a camera in here that's just kind of like a placeholder camera. I'm not in it right now. Good. So I'm just going to pull this out, take my light, move it, bring it up bigger. Now, looking at this, the way that this highlight is so big is because the light is like that big, okay? If our light is like huge, like this big block, it will flood the entire scene. We won't get this nice sharp highlight. So I'm going to make this nice and thin like so. I'm going to rotate it. And then I'm going to push this off to the side. And I recommend to you only add, let's say, one light at a time. That way you can really focus on what is this one light doing. Usually people try to add 5 lights and then they tweak between all these different lights. Now I can jump to my camera, hit this render button, and then see, boom, that looks a lot better than it did a second ago. There it was before, there it is now. You can see how I'm getting this nice strip of light right here. If this is too intense, okay, looking at this, you can see it definitely is a whiter color, but it's not super bright. Maybe I want to go, too many windows, back to my base material, back to my reflectance. Maybe I want to take this global specular and just pull that down some. That didn't do anything. Maybe it'd be a little bit more harsh. There we go. All right, so now it's a little bit softer. If I decided I wanted to change the color, I could go here and give it a little bit of a tint of a color. Okay, in this case, I really don't want the tint. I just wanted to show it in case you wanted to have that tint on yours. Leave it white. All right, so now I'm looking at where this line is. I want to look at it and get the line in the right spot. If you look at these, the line is basically all the way on the left side of the object. What it does is it helps define the shape of it, define the curve of that object. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to close this, jump out of my camera, and then I'm going to move it this way, move it this way, and then give it a rotation that way. Jump back into my camera, hit the render button again, and you can see how it moved that line over a bit. Now in rotating it, I kind of thinned it out some, so maybe I want to make it a little bit thicker. So let's go back here, make that bigger. You can also work in several different views, so if it helps, keep this camera here, but then tweak it in one of your other views, you could do that as well. I'd find jumping in and out. I like to have the big workspace. Okay, so now we're playing with that, right? I'm going to make it a bit bigger and push it even further over if I can hit the right button. There we go. And you'll see how this is pretty much going to be like right on the side of this. There we go. So that's pretty good. We get this nice highlight happening here, a nice line right there. We get a nice line here. The other thing that we're kind of paying attention to is if my logo is right in the center, I never want to obscure the logo with a big highlight line. Notice how this is their logo. The highlights are right here and right there. So if my logo was in the middle, I have this big white strip down the middle, it's going to hide my logo. I don't want to do that. All right, so that's good for that side. This side now looks kind of ugly. I also don't have a shadow, so let's add a shadow to this. So I go to shadow, I choose area, and again, before I go to the next light, I want to make sure this one's good. All right, that's probably a little bit too harsh. Again, you can look at the image here and see it doesn't look like there's a shadow, but there definitely has to be something probably behind it. Maybe not in this one. Go back to this. This one you can see a very soft shadow. Soft products typically have soft shadows to them. You'll see soft shadows here, soft shadows there, soft shadows and soft reflections. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take the density of this light or the shadow and put it down to, let's say, 20%. So now I have a shadow. It's very subtle, but it's there. okay? Maybe I'll take it up to 30 for now. There we go. Just so you can see it better on the projector, you can see there is a shadow right there. All right, so now I'm going to switch out of my camera again. I'm going to duplicate my light to the other side. I'm going to rotate it around and switch back to my camera. Now, if we look at that shampoo bottle here, there's a highlight hitting this side of the bottle. There's a highlight hitting that side of the bottle. That's what makes that lit up from both sides. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm basically emulating what I see right there, and that's what we have, these two strips of light, boom, right there on the sides. Your product may want a little bit more light in the front. Sometimes when you light it from the sides, you get these nice highlights, but the front appears a bit dark. So I'm just going to zoom out. I'm going to duplicate my light again, because that one's done. I moved it down. I didn't want to do that. I'm going to rotate it. And this is going to be pretty much like a head-on light. Okay, I'm going to get it pretty close. That way they're all kind of like bunched together. Now this is going to be a bad thing. We'll have to fix it. Okay, so now we have this highlight coming right in the middle, which is what I said we don't want. We don't want this harsh highlight right in the middle. I want light in the middle. I want it to be illuminated, but I don't want this highlight. If I take it off the material will not have a highlight, but the rest of the highlights are gone too. I only want to remove it from this light here. So if I go to this one, I'm going to call this front light. I'll call this one right light. I'll call this one wrong light. That was a joke. All right, so I'm going to turn off on my general. Down here at the bottom, I can choose what it does. So I can say diffuse, specular, global illumination. If I turn specular off and I render this, I get the illumination from the light, but I don't get the specular. One of the huge benefits of 3D is that we can control those specific things. We can turn shadows off on lights. We can turn off the intensity of the light, so it's only the specular that we see, or only the highlight that or only the coloration that we see. Cool. So default light setup is good. I'm just going to group these together and call this lights. And this is just background stuff. All right. So now that I have all of my stuff set up, I'm going to go into my objects, and I'm going to start loading in the materials for them. So this is my base material. Let me just delete all these other ones I have, because I don't need/want these. Oops. I guess I deleted too much. Hold on. Delete that. Come on. There we go. So I'm going to duplicate this, and I'll do one at a time. So this will be round bottle. I'm going to go to the color, click on my texture, and then find round bottle. All right. Now, if you get a warning when you load a texture inside of Cinema, that means that you haven't set it up to tell it that you want the textures loaded or copied into your folder. Okay. Remember this. I showed this before, but it's been a while. Under your preferences, when it loads, under paths, you want to make sure that your product is loaded as that folder. That way, when you put a texture in, it knows, okay, this is my scene. All my textures are in that folder. It'll make your life a lot easier. Okay. So here's my round bottle. There it is. I'm going to drop my round bottle onto bottle and hit render. And I don't see my texture. Why don't I see my texture? Bottle. Oh, I grabbed the wrong one, which is round bottle, not round bottle texture. That helps. Round bottle texture 15. There we go. There's my texture. All right. Pay attention to, this is at 100% right here. Typically, when you come in, it's going to be at some weird percent. So if this is at 70%, you might see a lot of jagged lines or something. When you zoom to 100, typically those jagged lines will typically smooth out. Okay, so just be aware of that. If it looks jagged, just make sure you're zoomed to 100 down here, and it typically won't. It might be just because your settings are lower, but for the most part, it should be fine. All right, so that one's done. Let me just duplicate this again. I'll call this Wavy bottle. I'll go to my dots here. I will pick wavy bottle texture. I will find my wavy bottle there. Drop that on it. Duplicate this again. And this will be big round bottle. I didn't call it big round bottle. I called it something else, maybe body lotion. Oval bottle. Is that what I called it? Yep, that's my oval bottle. But I had a different one. All right, so now I have these 3 products set up. Now, the cap on these are not the right cap. Typically, there's a different texture or color or something to the cap. So this cap is probably going to have the same texture that this cap would and same texture that that cap would. Okay. So I'm going to duplicate my base material, and I'm going to call this cap material. And I'm going to go to my color here, and I think I'm just going to desaturate and maybe darken this a little bit. Okay, now this is one texture I'm going to use on all of these, so I don't need to duplicate it for each one. I'm just going to use it for the specifics. You can also just drag right into your scene and just drop it right on the object. So before I start copying it to the other ones, let me just see if this looks good. Maybe a little bit more blue in there. I think I probably took too much blue out. There we go. I'm satisfied with that for now. All right, and tweak it after. Now, to get these ones, let me jump out of my camera. Let's see. Oval bottle is right here. To get this one, I need to grab all the faces and assign it just to the faces. So I'm going to switch to my front view. I'm going to go to face mode, and I'm going to grab all the faces for that piece. If I marquee it like this, there we go. I've grabbed it all the way down to there. No one's going to notice if those tiny little edges are a different color. It's fine. Okay. So now I just drag the cap material onto here. And what Cinema does is it assigns the material, and then it adds this little selection tag. Okay. If I click on this, you'll see where it says Selection, Poly Selection 1. So I'm going to double click and just rename this to be cap. Then I go back to here, I drag this triangle into this area, boom, and now it's cap. It just makes it easier for us to select things if we have it named correctly. Cool, and I'll do the same thing for the other bottle. So turn that one off, go to round bottle, nope, wavy bottle, there it is. Switch to my front view. This one might be a little bit trickier to select, but if I'm close enough, it should be good. I may want to use my UI selection to grab that, but I think it's good. I'm actually going to go, oops. I hardly ever use shrink selection, UK. There we go. There we go. Make sure when I do that, or if you do that, that you also don't select from the top, or deselect from the top. It sometimes will do that. So cap, wavy bottle, drop it onto here. Or rename this to be cap. Cap. All right, jump back to my camera, hit the render button. There we go. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, I can tweak them further. Maybe the cap will be a little bit crisper of a plastic. So if I go to my reflection, I take the roughness down some, maybe pull the reflection up a little bit. All right, now I still have my settings low, which is why everything looks really grainy and ugly. I still need to tweak my colors also. This blue that's on this material I'm not really satisfied about. Let's go into more of that blue. There you go. It's a better blue, but I'll still tweak it after. All right. Cool. So let's say those are my products. You could have more products, obviously. I'm just going to switch back to my model mode. Switch my camera off, and just do a little bit of tweaking on these. If I'm rendering this inside of Cinema, I want this to then be laid out. Round bottle, there you are. So all these obviously are scaled correctly. Look at the way that you have your stuff set up. Typically, if you have small item and a big item, it looks weird to have it composed like this, small than the two big ones. Think about your design things, your design principles. The small one might want to be in the middle with the two big ones off to the side, right? So let's do that. Let's take this, no, there it is, oval bottle. I'm going to move it up. I'm going to give it a little bit of rotation. I'm going to go to my wavy bottle, give that a little bit of rotation. And I'll take my small round bottle, and let's say move that right there. Now on my camera, that's a better composition than I had a second ago. My highlights are still working. I can still see my labels. I'm a bit far from my object, but I'll fix that as well. Okay, good. Anytime you're doing a rendering, notice how quick these are going. 2 seconds, 3 seconds. If this was to take 30 seconds a frame, that's an incredibly long amount of time. All my settings are very basic. I've set ambient occlusion on here. You probably don't have that by default, and you're probably still on standard, which again goes slow, but you can see how slow this is going or how much slower this is going because it's on standard. I must have something else set up, no? Cubic? Yeah, that's weird. Usually that would go faster, but it's not. This is on preview. Yeah, okay. All right, so let's move my camera a bit closer. So I'm going to go and make sure I'm in the camera, make sure I'm in the zooming. Are you locked? You're not locked, right? Why aren't you zooming in? Oh. The cameras inside Cinema kind of suck where you can't have them selected when you zoom in. I always forget that. All right. So now I'm kind of composing what I want this shot to look like. This is going to be my camera pan from one side to the other. Nothing fancy, nothing crazy, just a little sweep across the scene. All right, so that's good there. I'm kind of like aiming it right in the center of my stuff. I have a little bit of room here, a little bit of room there, and we need that. All right, cool. Let me jump out of my camera for a second. And now I want to do my sweep, okay? So I'm going to group that camera to itself. Okay, so it's in its own little null. I'm going to move the pivot right to the center of these products. Okay, so right about there. There's no exact center, but right about there seems like a good spot. I'm going to hit L to get out of the pivot mode. And now this is why I did that, so that I can grab this green and rotate the camera around those items. Okay? You never want to just grab the camera and try to move it and animate it, because it'll look really blocky. It'll look kind of like not smooth and ugly. It'll look smooth and not smooth, and it will look ugly. All right, so I'm just going to set a couple keyframes on this. If I pay attention to what's rotating here, it's just this top one, this H. So I'm going to go to, let's say, here, go to the very beginning of this. How long do I need this thing to be? 6 seconds. So 6 times 30 is 180 frames. There we go. So I'm going to set a keyframe here on the H at 0, go up to 180, give it a little rotate to that side, hit the keyframe again, and then just hit play and just make sure that this does go sweeping across there.
All you do is put an empty null around your objects, right? And then just set the camera to target that null?
Yep. Okay. Well, the camera is inside the null. So as I rotate the null, it's rotating the camera. Okay. Cool. And that also gives us the ability, if we needed to, I can click on the camera and push it closer. And I haven't screwed up the animation. The animation is still there and it still works. So you still have some flexibility. If we tried to animate it by hand, we would lose all that. Okay, undo that. All right, so the camera moves. It looks like it's a pretty good sweep from one side to the other. What we do get in this, though, is that it's easing in and easing out. So if you remember from After Effects class, it's slowly going into the motion, doing the motion, and then slowly going out of it. On camera moves, that's very bad. Think about if you had an animation and you had a cut and another cut and another cut. If every cut is this slow, fast, slow, slow, fast, slow, It breaks the movement of it. Okay, when you do a demo reel, typically you move from one piece to the next to the next. So we want to change this. So I'm going to right-click on the keyframe, go to Animation, and say Show F-Curve. And the F-curve is very much like you would see in After Effects, your curve of how fast it's going. We don't need to do anything fancy. All we're going to do in here is just say break, or linear. And what that does is just makes a straight shot. Okay? Now I jump back into the camera, hit play, and see how smooth that transition is from one side to the other. That's all we need. Perfect. So now I would go into my render settings. I would turn on ambient occlusion. Let me make sure I didn't want anything else, right? Just the basic stuff. Yes. I want this to be physical for sure. I want this to have ambient occlusion because it looks nice. Output 960 by 540 is the render size. All frames, yes. I'm going to save this to my folder. Product renders. I also recommend naming everything with your name. Sarcona product, and I'll put C4D in here. If you ever lose your files, which people do all the time, you can find it by just finding your files. Go to my physical settings, change this up to high. There's no motion blur, I don't need that. You could add depth of field, but not in this scene. It's not really a huge necessary unless you really had a shallow depth of field. And then I'm going to save, and then I'm going to render. That part's pretty much the same from what we've already done before. We've already gone into those render settings and saved things and rendered it out. Always look at your files as you're rendering your stuff. Wait for a frame to get done, and then let it go. You'll see that my 3 seconds of frame back here is nothing compared to how long this is now going to take because we have it up to the highest settings. My preview is typically junk. This is going to be a nice render when it's done. So I'm going to hit escape because we're not going to watch that. The rest of the movie part is the same. It renders out all the sequences. We bring it in After Effects, make that into a movie. Nothing different there. For the still, we have to change a couple things. So I'm going to change this in here to 3000 by 2400. Make sure that's the right settings, yes. 2400 by 3000. I always do that backwards. We're only doing the current frame, and everything else is the same, okay? Now, with this camera, this is way too far away for this ad. So I'm just going to jump out of the camera, click off. Let's make a new camera. And then I'm just going to click on it so I'm in it, and then I'm going to zoom in to get what I want. Remember that I also want to adjust all my camera settings. So my focal length of 36 is what my previous one was. That's the default. I may want to make it, let's say, 150. Okay. Now it's hard to see, but there's two lines, a line on each side of my product. That's what's going to render. So I want to be very aware of that. Also think about stuff you may want to include in your rendering if you decide to tweak it. For this thing here, it's just the products. That's all it is. But if you had an actual ad for a product like this, you can see that there's text on the bottom here, text on the top. This one too, there's text on the top, text on the bottom, text here, text there. So if you wanted to make an actual magazine ad where you had a title, you had some info on the bottom to make it look more professional, look more like something you would see in the real world, you'd want to just back off a little bit. That's all. We just want to back it off so that we have the room on the top and the room on the bottom to include those things. We don't want to be right on top of it. And it's always better to be maybe a little bit zoomed out than to be right on your objects, because then you don't have any room to get out of there. All right, so once we're here, we'll go into this. We'll change the name. Instead of Sarcona Product C4D, we'll call it Sarcona Product Still C4D. And then we hit Shift-R again. And again, it goes through that whole process of rendering out this entire thing and being a huge image that it would render out, okay? And it'll save it into our folder. So then you would turn in your movie. You would turn in your still. There it is. And then your scenes, textures, and that's it, okay? That's the Cinema 4D way. The Keyshot way is not terribly different. The only thing we have to do is we have to get the stuff out of here, though. Okay, so I'm going to save this as Sarcona product, and I'm going to say Keyshot. And all the stuff that I have here, cameras, lights, background, I don't need any of that for Keyshot. Okay, even these materials, these are all the materials I have for my products. I don't need those, or for the backgrounds. All I need is to make sure that each one of my items has a separate material on there. So regardless of whether you're going to do it in Keyshot or Cinema, you still want to make sure your textures are lined up good here. You still want to make sure that the caps have the cap texture, the bottles have the bottle texture. They don't need to be polished, they just need to be separated. That way Keyshot knows what items go to where. We can't select individual faces easily in Keyshot, so we just want to make sure that they're all separated like this. We also can't have anything that's a subdivision surface. If we subdivide it, if we smoothed or lofted or, oops, I always go to that wrong one, lathe or sweep or any of these things here, Keyshot doesn't want any of that, okay? So we just leave it like this. For the sake of speed, I'm just going to delete the stuff that I don't need. There we go. Oval bottles there. Body lotion I don't have in the scene. Black bottle I don't have. All right, so I just have those 3 items. All right, so I'm going to save this as Sarcona product to import into Keyshot. All right, I like to make sure that I have it labeled. This is the one that's going into Keyshot. Keyshot will actually accept a Cinema 4D file. So I can actually bring my Cinema file right into Keyshot. Just as a thing before I get into that, if you're going into, let's say, Dimensions, you would want to export your stuff. I don't believe Dimensions allows that. You would export it as an OBJ right here. So you would say, whatever this is, Wavy bottle, OBJ, and then Dimensions will allow you to bring that bottle into it. All right, so this is Keyshot. The interface is very simple, and it's very quick as to how we set the stuff up. I'm going to import. I'm going to find my product to import into Keyshot, perfectly named. I'm going to snap this to the ground. Sure, all the settings are pretty much the same. Import. Okay, so this is how they come in. And you'll see right away, this looks pretty good compared to what our default is starting off inside of Cinema. This environment is already being lit by what's called an HDR. It's a high definition, high dynamic range image that's lighting this entire scene. All of these things here under my environment tab here, under library, is all different HDRs that I could choose from. Oh, thank you. Good? Yes. Yes, we did. One of the sucky things about Keyshot is the inability to shrink your menus correctly. It just doesn't want to get smaller than it currently is. Let me just switch my image. Don't do this. There we go. All right, so now everything fits. All right. So all of these are here. If you go to Window, Library, you can load the library panel. Sometimes this gets hidden, and you just have to go back to Library and just load that again. Same thing on the right. This is all project stuff. So under Project, you would click any one of these if this window is not showing. So if I go to Scene, here's all the stuff from Cinema. Here's my null. Here's each one of my bottles. If I open these up, here's the cap. If I open that up, here is the cap material. If I open my Wavy bottle up, here's the Wavy bottle cap. Here's the Wavy bottle itself. If I open the oval bottle, here is the oval bottle, come on, cap, and then here's the oval bottle. Okay, so you see, because we had the materials separated, it automatically knows to keep them connected like that. If I didn't, if they came in as one object, it would read it as one object, and we wouldn't be able to assign it just to a cap. On the materials here, you can find stuff. So if I just type in plastic, it'll bring me a whole list of different kinds of plastic that I may want to choose from. So if I'm looking for something specific, I can say, okay, here is, what does it say? Plastic stereolithography rough. I don't want Let's say this purple cloudy texture. I'll drop that onto my bottle. Boom. Now it's on there. If I want to adjust the material, you just double click. It loads the colors here, and then I can pick the color I want. Or I can go to the Textures tab and go to this. This one doesn't have one specifically, but typically there is a Textures color that we would see. So this specific one doesn't have it. I'm going to go to Plastic here. There we go. Now I can go to Textures. Now I can go to Diffuse. And I'm just going to double click and find that image. E drive, there, product. This is, oops, oval bottle, texture. There we go. All right. When it brings it in, it doesn't know how to bring it in by default, so it just throws it on there. From this mapping type, we choose UV. And then further down, we have to choose one of these. I believe it's sync and flip vertically. There we go. All right, so I turn sync and these off, and I say flip vertically, and it puts the texture in the right spot. All softwares are not equal. There's typically some sort of tweaking you have to do. So there it is. And then I can go ahead and adjust what this looks like. Go back to properties. If I want to play with the roughness, I can pull the roughness down. Pull the roughness up. You'll see that it also adjusts. So it looks like the highest it can go is point, let's say 0.5. But if I let go, it'll let me do it again and again, or I can just type it in. Oops. There we go. So now it's really rough, or if I put it to 0, then it's really not rough. To move around the scene, you don't have to hold Alt or Control or anything. You just click and drag. You can use your scroll wheel to zoom in, your middle mouse button to move. If I want more reflection in here, I can kind of pull that up, bring it down some. So this is called interactive photorealistic rendering. And more softwares are actually going to this type of rendering setup. Arnold, which is a Maya program, I don't think I have it loaded still. Arnold GPU rendering. Okay, so this is going to be Arnold, which is GPU rendering, which is allowing you to do more photorealistic interactive stuff while you're like right in the viewport. So that looks pretty good already. You'll see that in here we basically just have the color loaded. On the textures, it loaded, you see that bump? It loaded that little toothy bump on there just to break up that surface a little bit. And that's good. That's all I have to do for that one. If I go down here and take this plastic cloudiness, and I not control, wrong software. If I copy the material, and then paste the material, there it is. Now it's on this material, this object, and then I can just double click it, double click the diffuse, and load its texture, round bottle texture right there. Okay, I can also right click on this one, paste that material, double click it, go to textures, double click, wavy bottle texture, and now all three have their specific texture loaded onto them. Here's the cap, double click this, I can choose the specific color I want for the cap, and again, you're able to see it pretty much like live, like you click it, it changes, and it's rendering as we're doing this. More people are going to this type of setup because the creative directors, they want to see, like, make it a little bit more here, make it a little bit more there. They don't want to have to wait for the renders to happen. They just want it to see what it looks like. Oh, crap. Closed it. Oh, there we go. Especially, you know, how easy this is. Just say, like, what would an orange cap look like? What would a blue cap look like? There we go. No, there's my OK button. It was hidden. All right, so that's purple. I don't want purple. Push us more towards the blue. There we go. Cool. Here's different colors that you can pick from. I've never used this. I just pick my own colors. But if you have a library, you're working with GM, you're working with Chrysler, and they have specific colors they want on their stuff, you can have that library loaded and just pick from their specific ones. Here's different textures. So if you wanted something, I want that to have a wood texture. Boom, there it is. Very easy, just drop it on. If you wanted, let's say, glass, again, you can search for glass. You can drag this in here. do it on that one. That one looked cool. You can see how fancy the glass looks. It's see-through. We can kind of spin around the scene. Well, just like the other plastic didn't have that diffuse there, let's double click and see if it has it. So we go to textures. It does have it. So let's see what it does, just for fun. What is that, my round bottle? My wavy bottle. And then we'll switch this to UV. And we'll switch this to flip vertical. And there it is. So if I wanted that, boom, there we go. Let's get it back to where we had it. Oops, too far. Redo. If I go to my environment, I can go here and pick different lighting setups. Okay, there's no lights inside the scene. We're simply dragging these into the environment, and that will change what our stuff looks like. So here we have something very similar to what we had inside there. We have these little planes right there, this here, and that. Here's one with just two. Okay. If we don't like where they're being placed, we can go to the environment. This is one, this is the other one, and I can actually move these around. And you'll see there's one down here. I could also move that. I can also go to my settings, and I can go to rotation and actually rotate the entire thing around until I get it lined up with what I want it lined up to. So you'll see there's a lot more interactivity with this, making it a lot more of a superior product when you're going to render your stuff. Even if you wanted, like, what does it look like in the bathroom? Boom, there it is in the bathroom. It's on the counter. And it's bigger. 25,000. There we go. I can shrink my products down, I guess. There we go. So now it's on the bathroom. Super tiny, but it's still on the bathroom. Yeah, travel size. Now it's outside. Who did that? I never go anywhere without my designer perfumes. Cool. All right, so very simple stuff. You'll see just dragging and dropping. That's the benefit of using Keyshot. Unfortunately, like I said, this isn't a free program, so if you want to use it, you'd have to use it in the classroom. Even the trial version is a separate file type that won't open in ours. Okay, so just make sure you have that. You can play with more stuff like how it's lighting. Right now there's self shadows on the ground. I could also go into caustics. There's nothing really caustic here, but basically if I had something really reflective, the light would hit it and kind of bounce onto the ground and kind of spill some of that coloration into the ground. We would see that. Something like a gem rendering. So stuff like this, that's caustics, where you have the light coming through and kind of spreading out and reflecting and shining onto the ground. This surface doesn't have that, so there's no point in having that on there. Ground illumination I could turn on too, but it's not really going to do much in this case. All right, let's go to my camera. Other stuff we can do, not that we would do it for this, but there's a stereo option. So if you did want to have something that is 3D, you could have like actual 3D rendered. You could render it out and it'll have two different channels that would then go into a compositing package. You can put 3D glasses on and then actually see the product in 3D. If you're on Facebook and you're part of any 3D groups, you may have seen where people are doing these 3D renderings where you can actually kind of like look around somewhat to a scene, so it's not just locked onto a front view. So you can do stuff like that. You can do depth of field. I'll pull the f-stop really far down. There we go. Let's go even further, 0.005. I hit select focal point, I hit boom, and then there we go. 0.01 maybe. Right? So very easy. The setup in here is meant to be just like quick stuff that you can get to. Now, as you leave this alone, you don't move the camera. It's constantly like updating what this looks like. So you'll see like it looks pretty horrible, and then gradually and gradually and gradually it's getting better and better and better. So I don't want that, so I'm just going to turn that off. All right, so now let's say that we wanted a still image. So I'm going to do the still image first. I may not want this background, so I'm going to go into my environment. I'm going to say don't use the lighting environment. I want to use a solid color. You click the color. Pick the color you want. Good, and there we go. The background is done. I'm going to go to my image now, and I'm going to set this up to be a rendered image. This is one of the bad things about this software is how they do this. This is my only gripe with the software. In order for us to render out a 3000 by 2400 image, we have to type that into our render settings. This resolution right here is based off of how big this screen is. So as I drag this screen bigger, that resolution changes, okay? It's weird. So what we have to do is punch in numbers here that are representative of 3000 by 2400, the same proportions. So if I type in 480 by 600, that's a good representation of 3000 by 2400 because it's basically 20% of that, okay? Then I hit this lock, then I hit, or the link, then I hit the lock, and now this is what it's going to look like when it renders. So now I can adjust this camera angle. I'm also going to go to the camera and maybe change its focal length. I think I want to put that up to, like, say 100. There we go. That's good. Okay, same thing, a little bit of room inside here. Then I'm going to go to render and say, I'm going to go to lighting first and say product. That turns on a couple extra features. Then I'm going to go to render, and then this is where I save my stuff. So I just click the button, tell it where I want to save. This, product, that's project. Renders, select folder. Give it a name up here, Keyshot, Sarcona _ Keyshot product. Here's my resolution. So this is where I would type in 2400 by 3000. You'll see it automatically defaults to an 8 by 10 by 300 dpi. That's what we want. Under my options here, this is my settings. One slider, that's all we have to worry about. So if 80 is not good enough, then you can put it up to, let's say, 120 or 140 or whatever it is. For this type of scene, it should be fine. If we had depth of field and we had a bunch of glass and whatever else, we would need it a little bit higher. But 80 is going to be fine. We hit render in background, and it opens up the screen and renders our stuff in the background. And again, it does a progressive render, so it starts off really pixelated and then gets better and better and better. You can see the percentage up here as to how long it's going, or how what percentage we're at. 6%, 7%, and so on. When it's done, it's in that folder. Okay, so I'm going to close this. Stop and save, sure. All right, so that's how you would do your still image from Keyshot. I haven't saved anything, so I should probably do that too. I'll save. D. I want to know how much life I'm spending just clicking on buttons. Keyshot products. All right. When you render, it pauses this view, so you're not like double rendering. So I'm going to go and hit P, not P. It's something else. Render, Shift P. They changed that, whatever. Shift P unpauses it. So now that I'm going to do my animated camera, and again, Keyshot lines it up pretty good where it's pretty quick. I'm going to go to my image first and set this up to be, again, a equivalent of 960 by 540. Okay? I can't punch in 960 by 540. My screen resolution won't allow that to happen. So I'm going to type in half of those numbers. If you're good at math, 480 by 270. Oops, unclick the link, unclick that. There you go. So this is half of that. So that's 960 halved. This is 540 halved. You'll see my resolution, or my images are no longer centered. So I will adjust where that's at. There. Now I'm going to set up the start of my camera right there. Okay, so that's where I want my camera to start. Now I'm going to go to my scene. I'm going to go to my cameras. Make sure that's right. Yes, yes, yes. Okay. Make sure all my cameras are on, or my camera is on. I'm going to right-click and do a turntable. Okay. This opens up a new window, which is their timeline. So you'll see it was hidden pretty much until we got to this point. I've never had it pop up where it said this before, so I'll just close that. I don't need that. And now if I hit play, there we go. So I just right-clicked on my products, said turntable, and now I have a turntable. It's going way too far around. We only want it to go, you know, less than a quarter of the way. We just double-click. There it is. I'm going to add another gripe to my list of Keyshot. This is how far it's going. So right now it's going 360 degrees. So let's say, I don't know, 70 degrees. Stay there. Click and drag here. Maybe that's too far still. So I'll just change this again, maybe 50 degrees. All right, that's pretty good. All right, how long it takes is right here. I want this to be 6 seconds. 6 seconds, done. There's no keyframes. You're simply creating these little modules, and the modules are what make things animate. Okay. So there's my default turntable. Let's switch to environment. Let's see if we get anything different. No, that's horrible. Not that one. Back to model. There we go. Good. If I wanted to go counterclockwise, obviously I can go counterclockwise, but that's not the direction I need to go. I'm also going to make sure this is on linear, which is what the default is. Cinema was doing this, easing in and easing out, so we want that to be linear. Close it. Close this window. What? Something happened here because I scaled it up probably. Something like that. 480 by 270. There we go. Now we'll lock this again. Go back to animation down here. Make sure everything is still in there. Still good. Yes. Okay. Oops. Don't cancel. I want to close that. All right. So now I go back to render again. Back to output. I go to the animation tab. And then this is where I punch in my animation stuff. So 960 by 540. I want the entire duration. No video, because we do that in After Effects. It's automatically going to go in my product renders. And I'll call this Sarcona Cam Anim. We'll do this as TIFFs. And then again, we hit render in background. And it does, again, the same exact thing. It opens up a screen, renders it out, and saves each one of these to that folder. I probably should have backed off maybe a little bit more. And this isn't a huge deal to even do in here because of how Keyshot has their stuff set up. So Shift-P, pause it. I don't know, I'm right on top of it. Or maybe, all right, I think my screen must have been cutting it off. So if I go to render that again, yeah, my screen was just zoomed in, so I wasn't seeing it. There we go. All right, so I'm just going to hit stop, just so you can see. If I wanted to move my camera, I just hit Shift-P. I move my camera wherever I want it to be. Oops. I accidentally hid stuff. I do that all the time. Right-click, show all parts. There you go. Okay, so I just moved it off to the side, and now that's my new starting point. So there's no, like I said, keyframes I need to adjust. I just kind of move my camera. This is where I want to start. And then now my animation starts from that point. Okay? Very easy to get it lined up, and then very easy to tweak it after the fact. Close the right one. Render, animation, render in background, yes. Okay, and then again, the same process would be here for After Effects. We have a sequence of images, we bring them in and populate it into a QuickTime movie. The more tools you have under your belt, the more likely you are to get jobs doing 3D kind of stuff. Because companies like Chrysler, like Ford, like GM use these softwares. Some of them even invest in bigger softwares. One of them is called VRed. It's very much like Keyshot, except Keyshot is a, I think, $1,000 program or a couple $100 program, and VRed is a $25,000 program. They typically have, like, let's say 1 or 2 or 3 seats at their place that use it, but you can do a whole lot more stuff with it than you can with Keyshot.
What makes it so much more expensive?
I'll show you the one thing that I really like about theirs versus the other one. See, these are all the render passes that I can do. If I wanted to adjust the reflections or the shadows in post, in here I'm very limited to what I can output. In VRed, the list is huge. Like ambient occlusion is here, shadows are there, but I can't even split those into other channels and have different items. In VRed, you can do it. VRed is also a little bit more robust. You can put a lot more geometry in there without killing it. Where this one, if you put too much in there, it'll definitely slow it down some. Just to show you a couple pieces, Dropbox. My computer, yes. D drive, Dropbox, Torch. Torches rendered from Keyshot. Oh, that was it. These are all different renderings I did from Keyshot of the torch that that we did for the county. And it was very easy to set up. I created a camera basically for each one of these pieces inside of Keyshot, and then I was able to just go to a different computer and render out one camera, go to another computer, render out another camera, go to another computer, render out another camera. And then from Keyshot, I was able to have a whole bunch of other passes that I did do some tweaking on and some color adjustments. And then you can see there's labels right here. There's also a label at the back of this so that I have this brushed aluminum and that label or texture is right on top of it. And then on this side, you'll see that is right there. Those are only two textures that had it. There it is. Oops. Oh, there it is. All pieces of torch. There we go. So this is the camera is panning and it's spinning around the object. Again, very easy to do. You just add a rotation around the object and then you add this translate of the camera and you're able to get these very smooth motions on here. And you can see here's those highlights, those lights kind of coming in from the side, just kind of lighting up just the profile of it. There's depth of field on it. And that's one of the things I would do in post. I didn't do the depth of field in Keyshot because I'm limited to what I can do inside there and adjust. Once it's rendered out, it's a flat image. If I do my depth of field outside of it, it's a lot easier to do in another package. And if I want this to go a little slower, I just take the, instead of 12 frames or 12 seconds, it's 50 frames or 50 seconds. So I had all of these rendered out within, 3 days or something like that using 6 or 7 computers. All right, so it's hugely powerful software. Cool. So that's all for the taking it from when you have your model, you have your texture on it, how you would take it all the way to those finishing stages. I do recommend, you don't have to, if you take an image, you bring it into Photoshop, you can still tweak it. All of my stuff that you saw here, I always do that, close folders, organize, nope, Dropbox. At some point, I will not be able to remember anything, and my class will be screwed. That's the finals. I want torch images, yes, no. Renders from Keyshot, that's what I want. So this is what the ambient occlusion looks like from that. And then this is what the original image looked like from here. Now this looks pretty boring. If I didn't even have passes or anything, I would still take this into After Effects and not just leave it as, like this. I would maybe darken my dark areas, maybe add some bright spots to it. I would even add maybe like a little bit of a glint where I have these really sharp highlights that just helps kind of pull things off. I would do the same thing with my still image, bring that into Photoshop and tweak those images. It's not just about I'm going to hit a button and render, it's about tweaking these things to make it look fantastic, right? That's a pretty boring render. If you take it into these softwares and you start playing with it, you can really create some cool stuff. I'll give you a really good example of someone who could take I'm going to say crap, but it wasn't crap. He had some pretty good models. Organizers. Student work. Nope. To be organized. Oops, graph. There it is. So this student would work in a program called SketchUp, which is done by Google. Right now, Google has all of their imagery is created via satellite data, depth data, and images that they've gotten from their camera. That's how they have like the 3D Google Earth stuff. Before that, people would actually go through and they would build all these things in a program called SketchUp. And he kind of, when he was in high school, adopted it and started playing with it. So that whole robot is done in this very simple, free-ish software called SketchUp. Same thing here. This is all SketchUp stuff. But you'll see just the textures, just the way he has things laid out are pretty good. And then this is all stuff that he did in post. So he took his very boring render of just a flat scene and adding things like this highlight here, a lens flare, some fog in the environment. You can create something that looks more realistic, more of a finished piece. Now that was for modeling class. This is for animation class. Same kind of thing. He used SketchUp for all of this stuff, except for the animation. He used Maya for the animation. And it's a very simple scene. It's just the rendering on it is really nice. It's still kind of grainy because of how complicated it is. Imagine how long it takes rendering now. 10 years ago, it was a lot slower. Now, when he gets to the still images, his poses of his characters, that's where he really kind of went into Photoshop, and he would spend probably about an hour and a half on each image in Photoshop, making it look like that. His render was basically just like a couple different robots there with some nice lighting, but all of the background stuff, all of these like glows and color bleeds, all of that's done in Photoshop. The smoke that's at the bottom. See, that's more of what he would get out of his rendering, and then he would be able to take it and make it look a lot fancier. Like that. And you see, just this one here, adjusting the colors, adding a vignette, huge difference compared to one that doesn't have all of those little features to it. If 3D is something that you want to do, you have to pick up every single tool that you can and just start screwing with it every minute of the day. That's his slide cycle. Let's see if he has his other stuff. Somewhere I have his other ones. He has these really cool like space scenes that he made. I don't know where they're at. And while we're talking about that stuff, this is something that, again, tools if you're working in 3D. This is a software called Fusion. It's a modeling tool. That's what it's for, but it's for accurate modeling. I have these things I printed up. I'm going to be bringing these to a show. I want to be able to put these onto a table and have them stand up like this. So I conceptualized this thing that would be a little holder, basically, that the foam core would be able to sit in, and side by side they would kind of sit in and lock in. I could do it in Cinema, I could do it in Maya, but this is a lot easier and more accurate as far as modeling goes. So I built this little clip, and then I can 3D print it, and then actually have these things. The cool thing about this software is if I go to this sketch here, I just change numbers. So if this is 1/4 inch, which is what my foam core is, I punch in the millimeters for 1/4 inch. If I have something like this, which is like 1/2 inch, I change the number. So I'm assuming it's going to be 12.6. And it updates the entire thing all the way around. If I need this to be longer, there we go. Now it seems kind of like, okay, well that's kind of like CAD. I don't want to do CAD. I want to do artistic stuff. But more and more people are using these other programs in industry. Ghost in the Machine, that's what it's called. And YouTube. Failing YouTube. That's not at all. Oh, shell. No one corrected me?
I didn't want to say it.
You
but I
should
was
correct
like,
me.
Does he mean Ghost in the Shell? Or?
Yeah, that's what I meant. So this, the guy who did the 3D stuff for this movie, not that one, where is it? Ghost in the Shell intro. Learn Squared, that was it. This is a video of him talking about one of the softwares that he used for doing it. It was called M2A or something like that. But he also uses Fusion, which is what that software is, to create some of the stuff. Is that the full interview? There it is. So all of this was created in there. You could definitely do stuff like that inside of Cinema, inside of Maya, inside of 3ds Max. But the quickness of it, the ability to just grab stuff and start extruding, pushing, pulling, is a lot quicker in those softwares. There's the full one. There it is. So there's a part here where he does the leg. And again, this is the life of someone who wants to do 3D, is that you watch millions of videos and then you catalog them and then try to find them in front of people quickly so you don't look like an idiot. Where's the leg part? Right there. All right. So here he is. He has this piece, and he's going to put a million holes in it. Boom. There it is. A million holes in this thing. And so something like that would typically take, if I'm in Maya doing this, it would take a lot longer than what he's doing here, especially if I wanted it to look really nice. And so you really have to adapt yourself into doing this kind of stuff, because it's important to know the best tools for the job. These that he's showing here, this is like one a day. This guy was a game artist, and one a day he would create these max photorealistic renderings of them and put those out. Here's him using that software, Fusion, there it is, to create this gun. And what's nice about it is it doesn't have to be like accurate, which is what I really wanted in software. You don't have to be accurate, but you can be accurate. So I definitely recommend any of these things if you can look at them and see what people are doing with other softwares. It really helps kind of bring all these other pieces together. I think that's it for that. All right, so once you have your textures done, figure out if you want to use Cinema or you want to use Keyshot. Like I said, the next project will definitely use Keyshot. If you want to just jump right in to the now, go ahead and go for it. It literally is, once you get it set up, it's a one-day thing, getting into Keyshot, dropping your textures on, and then doing your stuff. The Cinema part is the time-consuming part, getting that all set up. Cool, questions?
Were you going to show us how to format textures?
What do you mean?
As far as like setting up a good size that fits the import to bring it
Oh,
over?
the one that you have. So the size that we set up initially, that 4096, that's all the same thing. Textures. Nothing there. So when you made it inside of Cinema, you made them at 4096. You told it to be, when you went to here, when you went to New Texture, and you told this 4096, and then you did the outline to create the wireframe, that's the size that you're going to be bringing it in as. that's my texture. So then I just create that on top of it, wherever it lines up, whichever one this one is. That one. This one. There it is. And then I just save these out as TIFFs. That's it. So once you have it, you just go to export, export as, and then save it as a TIFF. You can save as targets too or pings. Either any of these will work. TIFFs are typically the best ones to do it as, so that's what I typically do. If I have transparency, I would do it as a ping. And then you should have one for each one of your products that have a texture on them. Really? That wasn't one of them.
Was it?
It was.
Where was that?
I don't know. Google always distracts me. It's like, what is in my next up list? What is in that list? This is videos, product. Yeah. So there's that part. There's the Illustrator part.
Oh, wow. Okay.
31 views.
Yeah.
Someone's watching it.
Okay.
It's mostly me. Here's a funny story. I'm using RealFlow, which is another 3D software, and I couldn't remember how to do something, so I typed in RealFlow fields. Sorry, what was it called? Filter. And my video came up as number 1. So I actually had to watch my own video to figure out how to do something I did 3 years ago that I was like, I'm doing it right. It just wasn't working right. So I just had to watch it again and listen to myself and try to ignore that. All right, cool. Anything else?